Welcome everybody to the Defining Time show on Fifth Wrist Radio, and thank you for tuning in. Now, Fifth Wrist was set up by enthusiasts to serve the community by giving community members the opportunity to review their own watches. This way you can be honest about what it's like to live with it and tell people about the pros and cons of the watch. If you haven't already, check out the website fifthwrist.com and review one of your watches to help another community member make the right decision. Now, my name's Anthony. I'm joined today by my co-host Adam from Medium Watch on Instagram. How you going?
Very well. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Very good. I'm super excited for today's show. So we might, I don't want to waste any time because we need to get into it, but welcome to the show, Ariel Adams of A Blog to Watch. How you going?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. I'm excited to chat with you guys. It sounds like you have a great platform.
It's a lot of fun. We are just community members having a great time enjoying this wonderful hobby, and we get to talk to some wonderful people in the industry, much like yourself. So we'll start off with some wrist checks, drink checks. We'll do a little bit of a rapid fire questionnaire, and then we'll get into the questions for Ariel. So why don't we start with you, Ariel? What are you wearing on your wrist today, and what are you drinking?
Well, okay, so I had some advanced notice of this, right? Usually I don't. I'll be like, uh-oh, I'm wearing a Casio G-Shock or something, which is fine, but it's like not what people want to hear. So I was just looking around visually, I'm like, what do I have out that I've been wearing? And I'm wearing my Bulgari Diagonal X Pro. This is a watch that's over a decade old now, and I had this watch on my list for many years. I wanted to get one. Now, one of the things I love about watches from this era is that they were so incredibly expensive that so few people bought them. So now, like a decade later, there's still a bunch of them floating around. This watch was like, I think it was like $18,000 or something like that, which it's a lot of money. And this was Bulgari's attempt to compete with the Hublot Big Bang. Remember, at the time, Bulgari was not part of LVMH. So right now, LVMH owns Hublot and Bulgari, so it'd be silly for them to compete with one another. But in 2004, when the Big Bang came out, it was a big deal. It made a lot of money. And so people are like, hey, we want to get in on that. So Bulgari like crazily over-engineered essentially a sports watch that had these articulating lugs, and the dial itself was sapphire, and it's a chronograph GMT. And there's literally nothing else like it. It was a one generation watch. They made like one limited edition version of it. Interesting enough, for an enthusiast community, there used to be this forum called Purist Pro. And it was like a limited edition, done for them. So it sort of showed that this was a real enthusiast watch. And I picked one up a couple of years ago. It's funny because I love where, the stories about where you buy these watches. The watch was in Monaco. Now, I'd been to Monaco one time, and Monaco's a place where there's a lot of very wealthy people, and there's a lot of showing off, and watches are a big part of sort of the Monaco lifestyle. And so I bought it online, and it shipped to me, and I was worried. I was like, is there going to be a custom, or, they can get lost or something like that. And it was, great. And I love the watch, and I wrote about it. And what I found was interesting is that I brought attention to it meant that other people were like, hey, we didn't know about that. And then they end up buying some as well. So it's kind of interesting how, today with the internet, popularity, becomes viral as it's known. Whereas, 15, 20 years ago, I could have known about this watch, even through the internet, and bought it. But then you guys wouldn't have known that I was into it because I'm not posting it anywhere public, unless, of course, I did on A Blog to Watch, which is essentially what A Blog to Watch was, is an ability for me to, talk about watches. But it's just interesting how that's such a new element of demand for how watches are marketed, and brands still don't quite get it. Like, it's such a powerful phenomenon. Most brands just can't wrap their mind around it. Anyways, I'll stop talking.
No. And are you drinking anything in particular?
Oh, coffee, because I woke up an hour ago. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Adam, what about you?
So I've got my Oxen Jr. Annual Calendar Light with carbon fiber strap, sourced from the crew. And my beverage of choice is a generic grapefruit seltzer water, so I can save up my money and buy more watches.
Very good. Wow, no alcoholic.
Huh?
I think this might be the first Fifth Wrist episode with no alcoholic drinks, because I've got a coffee as well. It's 10 o'clock in the morning here in Adelaide, Australia. So, and on my wrist is my H. Moser and C Midnight Blue Fume Pioneer Center Seconds, which I watched. Ariel, you did a shortish clip. It's about 3.5 minutes or something like that on that watch many years ago, and I think I've watched about 100 times.
Wow!
So thank you for that. But yeah, I'm just loving this watch. It's just it's a great piece.
I have a question for you guys. You said you normally do shows where people from the community come on and review their watch. Now, when you said that, it immediately made me think of this interesting phenomenon that I observed a long time ago. And it was essentially this. People would buy a watch and they would go and then read reviews of their watch, basically after they had already purchased it, to revalidate the purchase or something like that. And then if someone didn't like the watch, they'd make a comment, like it was a defensive comment. And I always thought it was so interesting that people were trying to look at reviews of a piece they already had. And so my sort of like notion on the matter is people want their own watches to be good, want to recommend them. It's kind of like a doctor who's going to be like, hey, do you know any good doctors? And you're like, no, I don't want to recommend my doctor. He or she's terrible. Like people like to recommend the people that do things for them or the investments they've made. So do people come on the show and give negative reviews of something they bought? That's my question.
So it's mainly with the review side of things, it's for the website. So people can click on review a watch and they review a watch from their collection. We do sometimes do reviews, but yeah, people, it's not about being negative. I think it's more so about what's it like to live with. And are there little things about it that you're not going to see potentially in a press release that you now have discovered 6 months later, that will either, if someone can deal with that, then maybe they go ahead and buy it. But if it's something that sort of really ekes at them and that they don't like it, then they might make a different decision. So that's
Understood.
basically, yeah. But, most of the reviews on the website are, mostly people make great watches. And yes, things go wrong. I've had many things go wrong, but that's part of it. It's like buying cars. Cars have things go wrong all the time, but it's just part of what it is. It's not about slamming the brand. It's about just making people aware.
Yeah, but you haven't lived until you've bought a truly bad watch and you ask yourself, how did this leave the factory? Okay. I've had that experience obviously more times than most, just given the volume of watches I've been able to handle, but it does happen. And it's funny. I remember there was this one watch, it's from a major brand. I'm not going to embarrass them. The bracelet was so bad, I basically kept calling it a wrist torture device. Okay, it was designed in a way where there's these unflush pieces of very sharp metal. When they're not flush, there's gaps between them, and so as it moved across your wrist, it was literally designed to pull your hair. You could not wear the thing without constantly feeling your wrist hair be pulled. And if you're like, I guess most men, you have enough wrist hair that would get caught in that. So it's like, how did someone wear this and be like, oh, this is perfect, let's put it on the market? Like,
this is the Speedmaster Reduced that I sold after 4 months.
See, maybe there's multiple watches on the market that have that problem. It's not, it's not, I don't think it's the only one. It was just like, how does this pass quality control? This was like an $8,000 watch.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we're trying to get at, is because potentially that may not come out in the press releases. But
wrist torture device? I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's get into the rapid fire. So Adam, I'll get you to go first, and then I'll quickly do Ariel, but this will take a whole of about 10 seconds. So Adam, are you ready?
Okay.
Okay, Rolex or Omega?
Rolex.
Vintage or modern?
Modern-ish. 1990s. Well, what's the line?
Mainstream or indie? Mainstream or indie?
Mainstream.
A few watches or a lot of watches?
A lot of watches.
And flip or keep?
Keep.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, Ariel, are you ready?
So same questions? Okay.
Same questions. All right, Rolex or Omega?
Right now, Rolex.
Vintage or modern?
Super modern.
Mainstream or indie?
I mean, look, if you're a collector, you got to mix the best of both.
True. All right, I'll let you have that one. A few watches or a lot of watches?
As many as you can.
And flip or keep?
Get married to them.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. Cool. That's not what I expected for some of them, but it's good fun. All right, let's get into the show. So we've got a couple of questions that we'd like to ask Ariel. I've also got some questions coming up later, which were from the community members in our Slack group. So that'll be fun. But Adam, I'll hand it over to you to kick us off.
Sure. So how did you decide to start a blog to watch? Why did you call it a blog to read originally? And what was the path you took from being a lawyer to being a watch blogger?
Thank you, Adam. That's a great question. And it's one that I've talked about many times, so I try to tell it in a slightly different way each time. I was a watch lover before a lawyer, before a blogger. I got into watches accidentally in college. You could say that I was sort of like a watch kid because I wore watches all the time, but I think it's different to be sort of a cognizant watch aficionado. You're definitely someone who's into something or just likes buying them. So I was into watches for a while. and I bought a lot of watches on eBay. You know, I was in college. I couldn't afford very much, but at the time you can get a lot of watch online for like under $100 very often. So I bought watches all the time, and I found that no one around me really cared about it. And it was so weird because I had so much passion for this hobby, if you will, and like no one seemed to care about it. Like I tried to get my friends into it, didn't care. Tried to get family members, didn't care. Tried to get like girlfriends into it, didn't care. And it was like amazed at like how much I cared about something that other people just had no patience for. I had some friends that gave me a quota. I mean, I told that story before. They said, Ariel, you've exhausted your watch conversation limit for the day. And eventually, I learned about people who were blogging, just starting up their own websites. You know, I didn't know that such a thing was possible. And I realized like, you could just like start your own website. And I had never started a website, and I didn't know that it could be so accessible. And this was probably around 2005, 2006 that I had started, you know, knowing this. I was living in San Francisco. So this is a place in the world where a lot of people were very internet savvy, and you didn't have to look very far to have like a chat with like a web designer. You could go to a bar and be like, oh, you're a web designer. You know, tell me more about WordPress. Do you recommend it? So I could have all this inside data being told to me, you know, right there where I was living and working. And I finished law school in 2007. And just after that, sort of everything came together, and I had time to build a website. And part of the story, which I think is funny, is I was at a company at the time. It no longer exists. And the bosses of the company just decided not to show up for like 2 months. I think maybe there was a medical thing. I don't know. We weren't told very much, but there was literally 2 months of time at the office where I had nothing to do. And I mean, I did all my obligations. I mean, like I was the lawyer, but there was like nothing for me to do. So I was like, you know what? I'll start working on a website. And you know what? Stories of people that start side businesses at work are long. I know that like employers hate that, and it's bad contractually, but it happens so often. People on their side time build a second business at work that sometimes has them leave. And so I started this website, and the reason it was called A Blog to Read is that it was almost supposed to be sort of like an open-ended thing for me. I was just going to write different stuff. I was going to write maybe legal articles and stuff like that. And I did a few at the time, actually, but it just sort of became apparent that if I just focused on watches, that was enough. And that's all anyone else seemed to really care about, right? Like if I was talking about other topics, I don't know that I could have found an audience for it. But with watches, what I did was try to bring a little bit more of a mainstream conversation to watch collecting. It was very sort of insidery and clubby. Right? There was the forums like Purist Pro. And what was interesting about them is to have a conversation with them, you had to be like accepted by them. You know, I guess you could sign up, but it was very clubby, and it was not open for everyone. I was like, why is there not a public conversation about this type of product? It's very strange. And this is again before social media and stuff like that. So that's really how A Blog to Read got started. I changed the name to Blog to Watch a little while later just because it made sense. A Blog to Read just didn't apply anymore. And a lot of people said that when I changed it to A Blog to Watch, that's when it really started turning into a business. Like I made a business plan, which wasn't exactly true. The idea is I started having to hire people because I couldn't do it myself. And when you have to hire people, you know, you have to make sure you have enough money coming in each month, which is, I guess, another thing we'll talk about. But does that answer your question?
Oh, definitely. And speaking of the people you've hired, what sorts of people end up in the watch press? Because no one studies for a degree in horological writing. People are journalists or they're menswear writers. Who are these folks, and how do people get a start?
Boy, that's the can of worms right there. I remember there was a Basel World years ago where I was at a dinner, and this guy sitting across from me was this new writer at Watch Time magazine. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was asking, I was like, so, what are your, tell me a little bit about your background in watches. Zero. Oh, wait, what do you do? This guy was like an English teacher in like a college, somehow ended up answering an ad on a job listing board for a watch journalist. And Watch Time actually had a practice of hiring people that knew nothing about watches. They're like, if they have a reporting or writing background, they can learn, and that's enough. That was literally their criteria. And there was a woman that used to work for another magazine, I remember, nice woman. And she said to me one time, I could be writing about watches or washing machines. I wouldn't care. And those were a lot of the people that were writing about watches, especially in mainstream media. I represented this sort of new generation of people that liked watches, but were writing as press. There were definitely watch lovers writing in forums, but it was just for the other club members. I sort of began this trend of making it that if you were in luxury media, consumer media, something like that, to write about watches, you really needed to understand them, because they had people writing about that knew nothing. And that's why the copy, as they called it in magazines, was like brand, material, price. Like, I don't know if you've seen some of those old things, but it was like Tag Heuer watch, steel, $2,700. It's like, what is that? That's not an explanation of a watch. These companies that had been marketing watches and selling watches could not speak intelligently about the product. And I found that fascinating at the time. So I had to combine a relatable way of speaking with an intelligent conversation about the product. And that's what I really think was what my goal was at the time. So when it comes to the backgrounds that people have, yes, there isn't an education in it, but what you do have is people that love watches and sort of find their way into it. And some people that love watches end up selling them, making them, designing them. But there are natural communicators out there, and those people know who they are. And, you know, some of them are these people that like want to be adventure writers. Like some of them, literally, their dream in life is to be essentially a trophy husband. And the idea is like, they're paid to take a little adventure and write about it for a men's publication for other dudes. And they're never going to make a full-time living that way. So they want to have a rich wife. I'm not even kidding. These guys, I bet a lot of them, that's like their aspiration in life, is to be a trophy husband that's paid to go on little adventures and write about it. So, you know, to pad the ego a little bit. I'm not saying there's something wrong with that, actually, but that's a sort of mentality which you actually find quite frequently. I grew up reading review magazines. Ever since I was like a little kid, I would read magazines, car magazines, computer magazines, camera magazines. I'm like obsessed with this notion of reviews. So I had this whole upbringing of understanding this sort of, it's actually quite an American thing, where you'd have media to help consumers be better consumers. This is quite rare actually around the world, at least in a historic sense. And so America, especially with things like Consumer Reports, really innovated in that ability to say, here's a service from media to consumers to help you make better purchase decisions of everyday objects or difficult to buy objects. And I always loved that. And so I try to add, you know, my background and knowledge of that with watches. And that's essentially my writing philosophy. That does represent some people's writing philosophy, but we have to train people. So to make a long story short, anyone who has been part of the ABtW team in any editorial or content creation capacity has been trained by us, and there's an editorial process I like to go through. But no one's sort of born a watch writer.
And then you mentioned that you want to be not clubby, you want to be more inclusive, but also focusing on the needs of people that have a serious interest in watches and expertise. The masthead mentions that you're both a trade publication and a consumer resource. How do the two differ, and what aspects of the site make it a trade publication?
That's a very good question. One of the things that you have to understand is that as I approached watch brands from the perspective of being media, they didn't know how to handle me or what became us. In their minds, there was two types of media out there, trade and consumer. This is a distinction they made. And trade media spoke to people in like the jewelry and retail industry. So it used to be like watch media originally wasn't really for, at least in the US, wasn't for consumers, but it was for people that were like buyers and retailers, jewelers, people that had like watch repair stores, so they can, know what to go to the shows and look for and buy and stock in their store and stuff like that. It only later became something that was more for collectors and consumers. So that's actually a relatively modern phenomenon. So for them, trade media was someone that reached like jewelers, and consumer was something that reached, people that bought the end client, if you will. And what I had tried to advocate to them for many years is that while we do indeed reach the jeweler, we also mainly reach consumers. And it was sort of the rigid way that they had differentiated media, which prompted me to have to say awkward things like that. But to consumers, I mean, it's obvious we reach other consumers.
Interesting. So at Fifth Wrist, we also have watchmakers that are a part of the gang and doing podcasts, writing reviews. These are guys that are WOSTEP trained, that wear finger cots all day. Is there a media for them?
That's a good question. Watchmakers are, to a degree, an unrepresented bunch. And part of that has to do with the lack of organization around the educational process. Switzerland has it, but for the most part, mainstream watch education now is funded by the brands to create technicians that assemble or do basic repairs. Sort of your more robust jack of all trades watchmaker, or someone who can just build a watch from a ground up. Those people are increasingly rare, and the mainstream schools don't really teach them. You have to go into various types of apprenticeships or work at certain brands to get certain types of experience. And so there's an overall lack of organization in just making watchmakers. It makes sense that there isn't that much of an organization that focuses on, continuing watchmaker education and allowing them to learn things. They have to take it upon themselves, and they find little casual forums and things like that. But it usually ends up having to do with money. If watchmakers are a strong and rich enough group, they create services from themselves, unions and trade organizations and things like that. Jewelers, for example, have these, but watchmakers and watch media just haven't had enough money flowing to them to be able to have the type of power to do something like that. So it's really just about the economics.
So you mentioned some of your areas of differentiation thus far. Are there any others that you feel are really focal to the site? And are there any areas of differentiation you've avoided? Are there places you don't want the site to go?
I mean, sure. I think at the end of the day, it's something that you have to ask yourself, what is it that I as a consumer want? There's a lot of websites out there that try to be everything. And I don't think that's smart. I think that if you look at historical studies about businesses, there's only certain things that business should focus on and not too many things. And I love the distinction between there are businesses that manufacture and there are businesses that sell things. And throughout history, you very rarely have companies that are good at both. And if they are, it's because they're so big, they essentially have different arms. But the management mentality, the skills necessary to make a product are very different than the skills necessary to sell a product or to distribute or market a product and things like that. And so I have to, within media, you have to ask yourself, what is your niche? I've always wanted to be a consumer resource, which maybe that sounds like, why would you not want to be? But remember, the context of the watch media space and the luxury media space when I entered into it was essentially as marketing arms or catalogs or whatever for brands. There was never a value to actually creating something the consumer cared about. Watch magazines were full of essentially fluff. Okay. And it was like you're looking through, you paid money for a magazine, it was fluff. And the reason it had to be fluff is they were so reliant on watch brand advertising, and watch brands were so meticulous about being control freaks that the media was disallowed from really being media. And so luxury media didn't have a lot of value to consumer when I entered into it. It was very, very little. I mean, barely in something like the Robb Report. But the Robb Report, for example, there is some curation to it. But at the end of the day, everything's supposed to be amazing. Everything's beautiful. Everything's great. Everything's the best. And when you look at that as a consumer, you're like, that can't be right. Because remember, like car media, they'd review a car, and if it was bad, they'd be like, oh, you better avoid this. And what I remember at the time, if you look carefully at like the car magazines, not one of the ads was from a car maker. They were from accessory companies and all these different corollary businesses, because in the automotive world, you could have a magazine funded just by aftermarket guys and insurance and all kinds of other stuff for men. But they had it figured out, and I never really connected to. So as long as watch media is more or less funded by the watch brands, it's going to err on the side of caution. This is where my combative side comes in. I have single-handedly fought a war against, the Swiss essentially, and the French to a degree, about saying open free media is good. If we don't like your watch, take that as feedback and do better next time. What we say represents what the consumer is probably thinking. So for us not to say it just means people are still going to think it, and you're not going to know where you need to improve. So I fundamentally believe that similar in academics, media is like a peer review process. And people who make things want to make better things. Now, at the end of the day, they're trying to make money. So I'm seen as a threat to that. But I think if you're passionate and love watches, of which there are many managers, you do want to have a better and better and better product so that you could have a more authentic ego. Many people don't want that. They want people to say good things about them because they pay money and their product might stink. but they feel that if someone like me says a product is great, it'll convince you guys, which is total BS, because watch consumers are very, very smart people. In fact, people that like watches, think about who they represent, like celebrities and politicians and great people of industry. Like the people throughout history that have been into watches, I mean, they've been like some of the most important people throughout history. I mean, look at who's on like Breguet's ads, like Napoleon. Like Napoleon was the biggest deal in the world, and he was a watch nerd. Okay? He was a legitimate watch nerd. And so watch consumers are not going to be manipulated as easily as, I don't know. I actually don't know in the luxury area where the manipulation is too easy. But the brands want media to do things that's bad for media and bad for consumers. And so I guess to answer your question, I'm a fighter, and I fight really hard for what I believe in. Maybe it's because of law school and the sort of pursuit of justice and all that stuff, but that's part of my personality. And I fight for what I believe is healthy for the larger industry. And I don't meet a lot of other people in this industry that have the energy to do that or that want to do that.
That makes a lot of sense.
And I think that's why you and A Blog to Watch is so respected by the community, because we see both sides. But I'll take the opportunity to ask a question from one of our community members in the Slack group. So this is from Jarrett, who's at The Humble Horologist. So he's saying, looking at most major watch publications over, half of them have e-commerce shops and sell watches for brands, etc. We don't need to name them. We know who they are. And then there's these other ones and there's really only a few, and A Blog to Watch being one of them. Is it inevitable that most of these publications will eventually have to start going down the e-commerce route to survive financially? And if not, what are the best ways for these watch publications to be viable long-term, yet remain objective and independent?
Okay, thank you, Jared, for that question. It's an excellent question and brings up a lot of discussion points. What is inevitable is that watch media, if it wants to exist, meaning a publication, will need to find a way of making money outside of what they think is traditional advertising, right? Because it makes sense in any traditional sense of the term that you reach a bunch of buyers and that advertisers would be interested in paying value to reach those buyers while respecting the fact that that media title has to attract buyers by being a good media title. That's what you would expect, but that's not what actually happens. So eventually, if there's a publication that wants to exist more than a few months, it has to ask the question, how do we make money? And when they go to brands who they seem to help sell watches for, I mean, we've quantified sometimes how many watches A Blog to Watch is responsible for selling. Now, it's not our aim. I'm not trying to go out there and be like, you need to buy this watch, but just you're a watch lover. You go there, you get excited about watches, and you do what a watch lover does. You buy watches. We've been responsible for an enormous amount of transactions over the years. Yeah. I remember sometimes brands used to tell me, like, there'd be these wildly lavish watches, like $400,000. It'd be like, just so you know, we sold one, and the client referenced A Blog to Watch, and they send me like a bottle of champagne, and I'm not much of a drinker, so I'm like, I'll take a commission. Actually, that'd be great. But anyway, so we know that watch media sells product. Why wouldn't people want to pay to advertise there? They don't want to. That's an entirely different conversation. And so a media title says, okay, I like this. I'm doing it well. People like my content. How do I survive? How do I make money? And these days, there's not a lot of options. And what people do is they look at what other websites do. And they're like, well, there's these, Mr. Porters of the world and things like that they have a blog. It's not really a blog, right? It's a catalog. It's a fancy catalog. And Mr. Porter does an excellent job at making fancy catalogs, but no one's going to look at their journal and think that they're really being like educated about the world, right? It's a feel-good way of browsing through their products. And so watch media is like, wait a minute, we help sell watches. There's not a lot of official authorized dealers do anything online right now. The brands kind of suck at it. Maybe that's just what we should do. Now, they don't really ask the bigger philosophical questions about what that means and how that's going to change their content and stuff like that. They just have more of a desperate reactionary approach to the fact of, crap, we can't make money. And the brands themselves are extremely supportive of it. We've been asked to sell watches a number of times. I remember one time this brand sent me a rendering of this tourbillon watch with like a little Blog to Watch logo like in the cage. And I'm like, nobody wants that. And I don't want to sell a $100,000 tourbillon with a Blog to Watch on the like that's, if I do that, let me at least design it. Let's do something cool. How about you sell it because you're a watch, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of pressure because the business opportunities that are brought to watch media from the brands themselves are not very smart and are self-serving to the brands only. And so there's this sort of natural force right now that pushes in that direction because it sort of seems like it works, even though I think there's no long-term proof that it does. So there are alternatives. I think the big alternative, which hasn't really been addressed from a technological perspective yet, is how do we charge people for content without forcing people into subscription? I believe that the future of all press online is consumers being able to do microtransactions for content. Not, I have to spend $10 a month, but how about you just charge me 5 cents so I can read the one article and get the answer I need, and that's that. And if I like you so much, I'll come back and do it again, and maybe have a subscription plan I'm interested in. But the ability to purchase media content, even podcasts, as microtransactions, 25 cents or less, is the key. And right now, there's a lot of technological hurdles in the way of that, but that's going to go away over time.
That's really cool. I hadn't thought about that but I think you're right. You can see it now with the subscription model with newspapers and things like that. A link pops up and you go and click on it, and then it says, no, you need to subscribe. But if it said, hey, 5 cents, charge your credit card and you can read this, potentially people would do that.
Oh yeah, all day long.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Yeah. So in the meanwhile, what are your plans? How can the watch press be financially viable without having bias?
Look, I think that bias is actually a good thing, right? People want to have an editorial perspective. Like, no bias means that it's too neutral of a discussion. And what I think is important is, let's say that I read a watch writer out there and they seem to have similar tastes as me. They seem like my kind of guy, right? Some of them won't, but if I read this person for a while, I start to realize that their opinions probably match my own because we're similar. So I want that bias, but I want the transparent bias. I think what's wrong is this notion of deception. Nobody wants to be deceived. They want to know when a message it comes from an advertiser or is related to revenue, and when the message is an actual authentic opinion. So I think we actually need to be more open about what our biases are and who our biases are to. And that way, people will be able to understand how to navigate those issues. People who like watches like ads. They want ads that are focused and targeted towards them, but they don't want to be deceived. They hate being deceived. So for me, that's really the trick, is how do you have an advertising message? How do you do something for a brand, but be transparent about it?
So I come from an academic background, and whenever I send something out, I'm required to make a disclosure. I've got to talk about anyone who's paid me money. I've got to talk about stocks I own. I've got shares in Swatch and Richemont and LVMH and all these various companies. But as a watch blogger or whatever, I'm not required to disclose it anywhere. Do you think there should be conflict of interest forms and disclosure statements in these articles? Or do you think it's just something that should be done more informally?
That's an excellent point, and I think that this sort of culture that exists in the legal world and the academic world about being very open about and of course the political world, about who's supporting you and what your interests are, this is crucial to having a robust conversation about any topic. Now, there are rules that exist. For example, the FTC has rules about disclosure of when something is an ad or when an opinion is paid for. It's very explicit, actually. You have to say if someone paid you for an opinion. And that's what an influencer essentially is, right? It's an opinion mercenary. It's someone who says, I will say I like something if you pay me money. Now, this is a business practice that we have allowed in this world right now, or tolerated, if you will. I don't know if it's great, but it's right here. And there are some rules. The problem is enforcement. There's no police anywhere there that are going after anyone for most of the lying which is happening in media. So we can have all the rules in the world, but if someone can get away with something, look, this is the luxury industry. It's all about smoke and mirrors. It was founded on, this cost me $50, but I'm selling it for $5,000. Oh my God, they're going for it. Okay? That's essentially the way that margins are created in the luxury industry. It's creating a guise. Look at sort of the house of Patek Philippe. It's all this construction to make you believe in the value proposition. Sometimes it's done so well and they're so successful at it that, watches even go up in value. But essentially it's founded on this idea that I have to make a lot of margin. That's the only way that I subsist as a company. So it's an inherent part of the luxury industry to lie as much as you can get away with. And if we don't have anyone policing it, then we have a problem. The only people who can police it now are you and I and other consumers. And what that essentially means is that we have to be very vigilant and know that these practices happen and just be good critical thinkers. Critical thinking and buying a watch go hand in hand. If you're not a good critical thinker, you shouldn't be into watch collecting. You're just going to lose a lot of money and be unhappy. So I'm sorry I have to say that, but it does end up falling on the consumer once again as a responsibility. Buyer beware.
It's always, but it's hard for. I think the disconnect between the community and some of the big brands is also part of that. And I think we're starting to see a shift where people are not believing things that they read all the time. And I can see the future is becoming very much, if you're not open and honest and transparent, then potentially people are going to lose a lot of their traffic and their followers, because people see through the smoke and mirrors a little bit more now. Especially when you get these celebrities wearing watches, and is that going to make me go buy a watch? Maybe for some people, but not for many others. I do have another question from the community. So this one's from Sean, who's at the Book Watcher, and it's really talking about the brands and relationships. And I think one of the things that the community members really don't get to see unless you're dealing with independents is what are the brands like to work with, because we get to go into an AD and deal with a salesperson that's potentially either knowledgeable or maybe not so knowledgeable and has been trained to know the basics about the way the thing functions. But he asked, have you ever been snubbed by watch brands or channels for trying to remain objective in your editorial?
I mean, the short answer is yes, of course. One of my favorite stories, I don't know if it's a favorite story, but it's an illustrative story, I guess you could say, was back when I was banned from SIHH and reinvited to SIHH in the same year.
Wow.
And it's a weird story, and I was told by the powers that be at Richemont that I would never know what happened or why, so I was just sort of this weird innocent bystander of an issue around me. And the idea was that there was a message, I believe, trying to be told to me of, hey, Ariel, don't F with us. And we're going to try to, show you our strength and flex in front of you by not inviting you to our party. I learned about this and I made a hell of a stink about it. And enough people realized we're about to make a really dumb decision here. So I got reinvited back. But that was an attempt. That was an early attempt at basically saying, don't mess with us. And I had someone from another brand one time who literally, this was at a trade show, went up to my face and said, don't F with us in like a financial, publication. Because I'd written an article that called into question something related to auctions and stuff like that. And they got very aggressive with me. And I don't know that a lot of people, again, that's why I call myself a fighter, because I don't know there's a lot of people that would have those experiences and like have that embolden them. So brands are, a little bit dangerous. They can be. And I'm at a disadvantage because I'm an American, and they don't take too kindly to Americans. They don't trust Americans. They don't want to give anything to Americans, even though they know that a lot of their products are sold in America. They don't want to share with Americans. And I don't want to make judgments about that. It's not just Americans. There's others. But, as an American, they don't even want me to make money. They want me to bring opportunities to them and let them flourish in my land. And they've never really been about partnerships. If you look at all of watch media, it's never really been about a real arm's length distance, mutually beneficial relationship. It's always been this like, how can I get this person to do what I want them to do? Watch brands, for example, they play a game. They'll call it a strategy, but it's a game of how to get the most amount of what they call earned media versus paid media. So it's basically, how do we spend the least amount of money to get the most amount of earned media? And it's literally a game they play, and they compete with one another, and they reward people internally for the amount of earned things they get versus paid things. It's not that they can't afford it. It's just like an ego thing for them.
Oh, earned media is much better. It's more authentic.
Yes, but at the end of the day, the cost associated with it, like all you need to do to get more earned media is, spend enough money in the publications that are helping you make money. They'll obviously be friendly to you and they'll give you earned media. It's the deceptive way of getting earned media, which I think is the issue, right? So dealing with watch brands can be a mixed bag. Now, once in a while, you'll find someone at a watch brand and you'll connect with them because of your mutual love of a project or just watches in general. And then the relationship can be beautiful because they realize, oh, you're actually one of us. And that happens. And I have an amazing number of friends and colleagues in the watch industry that are just good people, and we have so much in common. All my best friends in the world don't even live where I live. I live in Los Angeles, and I would say none of like my best friends live in Los Angeles right now. They live in other places, and we're all connected by watches, and many of them are in the watch industry. But these are the exception. The average sort of mentality in the watch industry is to take advantage as much as possible, and they don't see the value in media, oftentimes because it's a cultural thing. Media in Switzerland, for example, doesn't exist in the robust form that it has in the United States. So people that in the watch industry, that they're exceedingly few now, that grew up in the United States, they inherently understand the power of the media and what to do with it. So I think the question was about how was it to work with the brands. It can be great when things go well. You know, they invite you to see some of their cool things. They put on some great events, and they're masters at emotion. But from a business perspective, I mean, if it wasn't for watches I love, I would have ditched this industry a long time ago.
Yeah. Wow. And what kind of watches do you love? What's a typical Ariel watch that sort of really takes your fancy?
I always came to a love of watches from the perspective of liking watches as a tool, right? Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, they are these tools that you wear, gadgets, if you will. And I remember when, as a child, like in elementary school, I would like measure the value of the watch by like the number of things it did. So, you know, I was always wearing Casios. I'd be like, okay, mine has 12 functions. That guy's has 14. I need those extra 2 functions. I don't know what they are, but I need them. Thermometer, hell yeah. You know, I'm in second grade. I need that. So for me, the ability to pack in a useful, elegant package, a lot of functionality, like that just gets me so excited. Like I love that exercise of making a good tool, putting a lot of things into it. It's not just shoving features into it, it's making it all work together. So I appreciate that element. Tools have to be something that make you happy. So they have to be designed well. They have to be comfortable. So there's a lot of things from an engineering and tool perspective to appreciate. And then as I got older and more mature, I was able to appreciate things like the history, artistic watches that have all types of craftsmanship, engravings and carvings and painting and all kinds of stuff like that. And so later, the art lover in me appreciated a different sphere of interest, and the sort of historian in me appreciated yet another emotional element to watches that are great. But I always came to the hobby as a very strict tool watch lover.
Yeah, awesome. Very much like myself as well. I think if the watch needs to be super, super functional to do, but I do prefer sort of time only, simple watches. But
yeah, as myself, because at the end of the day, like that's what you need most of the time. I'm not. How often you're like, what's the date today? Oh, did I even set it?
All right, I have a question from. I'm going to prepare you for this one because it's from a mutual person, a private person that we know, which is Horological Dictionary.
Okay.
And he wants to know, when is A Blog to Watch going to be coming out with some sort of travel clock or insurance so we can get some competitiveness in the market?
Right. So I think that the question is really. When is it that A Blog to Watch is going to give the community things they actually want, right? Like I think there's a desire for us to be creative directors, and that is to help bring them products that they want. And they're like, okay, you know the community, you understand us, you know what we want to pay for and what, help bring some of it to market. Well, the short answer is, I've designed a few watches. We've got a few products in the store. The store will not sell watches for a lot of good reasons, but I'm trying as much as possible now to do that. Getting stuff made is hard. Getting brands to make stuff for you is very hard as well. I mean, look, do you think that given the type of person I am, I'm just like, hey guys, I offered a new color. Like, I don't just want to watch with a new color. Like, I want them to create something new, some new shape, some new thing. And every watch that I've done so far has had some novel element to it that hasn't been done before. And as I move forward, if I'm going to do a watch with a brand, I want them to at least change a part, get some new machining. And they're like, okay, well, you can pay the $10,000 from the machining. I'm like, why would I do that? Like, do you guys realize how I can help you? Why are you being so freaking cheap right now? So again, that's a lot of it is them not willing to invest because they're risk averse. They're Swiss, right? The whole point is to be risk averse. So they don't want to take risks is all, but then they end up never being creative. And that's why we have a creative vacuum in the industry. So I am working on it for sure. It's complicated because there's a lot of economics involved in it, and I want to make sure that it's sustainable and priced correctly. I've designed 7 or 8 things, like down to the schematics, that haven't been released yet because I don't really have anyone right now to pay to fund it, because I need to find like the factory that will do it. So I'm working on it, and I'm sorry that what the others have brought out just aren't what the community wants, but stick with me, we'll get there.
Awesome. I think, while we're here, what are your thoughts on the recent sort of revelations around LVMH Luxury Ventures having invested in HODINKEE, and that the potentially, that they may have been doing this for some time? What are your thoughts on the whole situation?
Look, it's funny how the sort of rumor mill, construes things. I actually don't know too much these days from my perspective. I've never really followed what that company does. Obviously, it's a small world, so I know a lot of the people there and things like that. And there are good people there. At the end of the day, I think that what I keep saying to people, which is true, is stop considering their media. It's a store, okay, and it's a store at an important point in the market for watches, because if you think about it, there's very few quality authorized dealers online, like the Watches of Switzerland of the world, the Buchereers of the world. These are these massive international watch retailer giants that, while they have e-commerce right now, they don't really invest in marketing it. They don't really invest in advertising to get people there. Like, they're just sort of seeing and waiting and seeing how it evolves. These are mostly set up to sell watches in person in retail, which of course these days is hard to do. So there's sort of a deficiency of like highly refined, high street retailers that are multi-brand dealers online that really spend a lot of money getting people to their stores. This doesn't exist. And so, like I said, Mr. Porter was Richemont's play, and they were like, okay, we want to make sure that we have an online multi-brand specialist that is cool. And actually, Mr. Porter was a good acquisition for Richemont in terms of what it is Mr. Porter's good at. I hope that they give Mr. Porter the ability to grow. And LVMH, this isn't an LVMH decision. This is within the LVMH VC arm. Now, LVMH for a long time has put money into startups or companies that believe have some potential in the luxury space. And most of them have not been media. They've been companies involved in things related to, logistics and packaging and anti-fraud or manufacturing and straps, materials, all kinds of stuff like that. And so there's this arm there that tries to put money in it because it has profits, and VC area is a good area to put profits and spend money on things. Anyhow, so going back to HODINKEE, a long time ago, when they got in the relationship with Kevin Rose, it was because they needed money to operate. They ballooned to an enormous amount of staff. No one's quite sure why they need all those people. Their overhead is insane. It's not easy to do what we do. If they don't have outside money coming in, I don't believe that they can pay their bills. Okay? And so I know that they have very aggressive salespeople. The LVMH VC people are in New York, so are they. They're constantly networking and trying to have meetings with the right people to get money. It's only a matter of time before they say, LVMH VC has money, we need it. What is it we can offer them? I'm sure it was lots of conversations. I'm almost positive it was promulgated by HODINKEE needing doing it. I don't think the VC came after them. I'm not saying there wasn't mutual gain there, but essentially it's LVMH trying to get a foothold into understanding how to successfully do online retail. Because remember, right now, if you're a watch brand like Tag Heuer, your website does not represent enough sales each month to really pay the bills. If you're going to focus on the internet as being a major revenue driver, you're going to need to do better than you're doing right now. And they spend very little on online advertising compared to what they need to. But they don't think that. They think that if I spend $5, I should get value. They have to spend tons of money. And again, you look at the American companies that understand how to advertise, and they canvas things. That's how you advertise effectively. Just mass proliferation of messages everywhere. Rolex understands it, and the whole watch industry admires Rolex, but Rolex, for whatever reason, has decided we don't want to advertise online right now, not yet, and that's a whole other discussion. So HODINKEE needs money, and they decided that they want to be a watch store, and LVMH's, venture capital arm is one of the few places they could go to get money. There's just not a lot of money available out there. I'm sure they weren't the first that they asked, but it was just one of the places. And so does it even further erode away at HODINKEE's ability to serve the community? Sure. Does it make sense for them from a business perspective since they need so much cash all the time? I guess so. It's better than a loan.
Yeah. Have you ever taken external funding? And if so, or if not, what was the thought process behind it?
Never took it. Have certainly been approached. Look, I know a number of other entrepreneurs out there, and I've seen people who have investors or multiple investors and what it does to their business, and it looks like it sucks. I've had people tell me that up to 50% of their time is dealt with what I call investor relations. Just reassuring people, talking to them, listening to their nonsense. Essentially, like, you kind of become like their slave a little bit. And what I recognized is that very few people out there who investors could come in and effectively improve what we do, right? Like, they'd want profits, but they wouldn't have a lot of ideas of how to get those profits. So while we've needed money all the time, I mean, everyone needs money all the time, it's never seemed like a good long-term solution. And I try to look at it from a long-term way, because when you get money from an investor, it might help you in the immediate, but the strings that come attached to it are so incredibly burdensome that they end up killing companies most of the time.
Yeah, it gives you a timeline. It gives you growth targets, which definitely changes things. Look,
Chrono24 is a great example. Chrono24 was this incredibly lean platform that helped connect consumers to retailers. It was purchased, and the immediate assumption was we need to make more money out of this, because Chrono24 had a tiny little team, and now a company bought it that had a lot more expenses. So they had to multiply the profits of Chrono24, I don't know, but at least 3 or 4 times before they were even happy. So the thing is this: they have purchased a company like Chrono24, and after, I don't know, years, finally maybe done it. But they basically had to increase the rates everywhere and do all kinds of stuff that ultimately weren't necessary because Chrono24 was doing just fine. So if we have to come in and somehow double or triple our revenue to satisfy some investor that doesn't really know what to expect, how is that going to help anybody?
Yeah, it's so true. And I'm a big fan of Tim Mosso, right? I love his work. I like watching his videos. They're very educational. And I think Watchbox is, for me anyway, and I'm speaking for myself, Watchbox for me, they're very open and honest that yes, they're trying to sell these watches. They're in their inventory. But there's still that element of, if your wrist size is this, then maybe this is not quite the watch, or, things like that. But at the end of the day, they're a watch store that need to sell watches, but they also do create great relationships with their clients, and they source watches. So I think, in my opinion, I think Watchbox is probably someone that does the community serving aspect of being a watch store quite well, and mainly just because of the videos that are just constantly coming out for people that are interested.
Let me comment on that. I think it's very important to comment. And then now Tim is someone who I not only respect and like to recommend, but is also a personal friend. I've known Tim for a number of years prior to him working at Watchbox. Now, to make the long story short, Tim's participation is really what you're talking about. There's really no other part of Watchbox that you know or have any relationship other than him. Mm-hmm. And what they've done, and it's kind of been this strange process, and Tim in some senses is to credit for, is they've basically sectioned him off. As long as he keeps doing his thing where he's producing videos and talking about the watches, he can just do it with almost no oversight. So he's created a little enclave for himself, which is this protected thing, because as long as they don't mess with him, he'll keep offering value to them. And he will leave if they screw with his thing. If they make his life any difficult, he will leave, I believe. So what you're basically saying is you like Tim and you appreciate the fact that Watchbox has allowed him to do his thing. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm just saying that's essentially what you're saying. Yeah. Tim has come to this approach from where he's at fortuitously. He was working in Florida for the company Watch You Want that Govberg purchased. And essentially it was purchased because of Tim. Tim was kind of purchased like chattel. I like to joke with him about this because he essentially was. Danny Govberg was like, I want you. You're moving to Pennsylvania. And he's like, okay, now you do that thing over there here, but in a nicer studio. keep at it. And again, this isn't derogatory to anyone, and I love Tim and I love Danny Godberg, but I just think the community needs to understand that wasn't Watchbox saying like, hey, we've got this super idea. Let's find a guy like Tim and make these videos all the time. This sort of formed organically before Watchbox. Watchbox was able to acquire it, and then Tim, through his intelligence and ingenuity, was able to sort of engineer a little cloister of him and his video people to do this without interference from the others. And as long as that still goes on, that's going to be great. But I don't think you could replicate that anywhere else. It just sort of happened in sort of an accidental way.
Yeah, so true. It was very organic. Righto, Adam?
So yeah, today we've talked a lot about how you started, how you've evolved, and the importance of keeping true. Where do you see things going forward? What's in store in 2021 and beyond?
Well, I think the obvious first answer is we got to get over this whole pandemic thing. The luxury industry is reliant on people having high consumer confidence, being in a good mood and having things to celebrate, and being able to travel and socialize. There's a deficiency of all those things right now. So when that's able to bounce back, we are back in gear. Now, I might be a little optimistic about it, but I believe that the world is about to see an incredibly optimistic period of celebration. Out of great lows will come great highs because everyone's going to be able to get back to work. There's going to be all these new things to invest in. Again, it's going to be contingent on vaccines working and things like that, which I think we're all very hopeful of. But if that happens like everyone expects that it will, we're about to have a boom period, which is what the luxury industry was made for. So there's going to be a lot of amazing opportunities, great watches coming. I think there's going to be a flurry of events. I'm planning on traveling all around the world to do meetup groups, spend time with guys like you and a lot of other communities just around the world, getting back out there. So I'm very galvanized to do that. And I will probably have brands support that, where we'll bring out brands and look at their watches and things like that. So there's going to be a lot more in-person events that I'm looking forward to in the future. That's definitely going to be a big part of what I'm going to do. Online, I think that, the sort of Zoom generation now that we have has taught people that there's a lot of things you can do that you didn't have to previously do in person. Not everything, but there are things you can do. So a couple of months ago, my team developed sort of a what we call the fancy Zoom meeting, even though it was a lot more than that, to show off watches. I'm very excited about how we can continue to evolve to present people watches in the online space in a way that's even closer to what it would be like to see it in person. Better production value, bringing the brands on a little bit more to help because I think that they have a lot to share. But I think that too much people are learning about watches first from like casual other pictures or influencers and things like that. And I think that media and the brands could do a better job at sort of presenting and launching watches for people. So that's something I'm going to be working on a lot. As a creative person, I want to design more products. I've got a lot of things going on. It really just depends about the right partners. That's what it is. It comes down to, we have ideas and we have a lot of audience members so we can bring things to them, but we're always looking for the right, manufacturing partners and stuff like that, no matter what it is. And those opportunities keep coming and I evaluate them. So I've got certain things in the pipeline, but I love creating accessories that help us love this hobby. I mean, like if you look at the car industry, there's so many things out there from sunglasses to apparel to shoes to be like, oh, that guy's a car lover. Other than your watch, there's just not a lot today that a guy can wear, or a woman for that matter, that hints that he or she might be into that hobby a little bit. And I think that we can celebrate our love of the hobby in a way that isn't nerdy. And so some of the shirts that I've been designing, things like that, are a step in that direction. And they've been very successful. In terms of media, I mean, look, it's just a matter of continuing to do what we do and to do it better. What we've learned is that this exact type of situation right now where we're having a conversation, connecting, is what so much of the community wants. They want to feel like there's a safe place to talk to other watch lovers and things like that. So A Blog to Watch is going to continue to think about how we can support those things. And for example, we talked earlier about, paying for content and things like that and subscription services. We are planning a subscription service, but one of the things we realized very early on is that people want more than just extra content because there's so much content available online right now. I mean, like it's amazing. I think it's beautiful. But like you and I could sit there all day long listening to watch podcasts, reading stuff, going through Instagram. It could take up every second. That's not what people want. People don't want extra articles to read. What they want is as a community, and they want more interaction with people whose opinions mean something. And so we're planning certain types of tools. For example, chats on the website between just club members, so to say. All these people are part of this club, and it could be on the website around the articles themselves. Is it somehow a little bit competitive with things like Facebook groups? Yeah, but I think the Facebook group is the awkward side, right? It should have never really existed on Facebook to begin with. It should be where people want to go. Such a large percentage of our audience doesn't even use Facebook, or rejects the idea of going to Facebook. So to be like, well, there's Facebook groups, well, that's not really an alternative for a lot of people. So being able to more effectively get together with people in person and online and connect with myself and the other, the other staff members is something which I think is valuable. For example, having like YouTube live sessions for just club members where we can chat and things like that. Stuff like that doesn't really exist enough. And I think that there's value there for people, right? Because the idea is it's about hours. Like you'll pay $10 a month if something adds 5 extra hours of entertainment to your month. If something adds 20 hours of extra entertainment to your month, maybe you'll pay $15 or $20. But I think that if you start to look at the value in people and what they get and how it's ongoing for them, I think things like subscriptions start to work. And it's way more appealing for me to innovate and experiment like this than go some route of just selling watches, because that doesn't interest me. I've never been a watch retailer. I don't want to be a watch retailer. I want to help get people excited about watches so they go support the watch retailers they like and have good relationships with.
Wow. That sounds like some really exciting stuff to come. And honestly, like I hope that one day you can make it out to Australia, because there is a huge, wonderful watch community out here full of people that just wonderful people that, they come for the watches and they stay for the people, because it's just fantastic.
Oh, I've been to Australia. I love it. I can't wait to come back. I'm planning a vacation. Actually, I need some advice to areas around, the Gold Coast and Brisbane. I know there's such beautiful tropical areas there, but it's a massive, massive area. So as soon as I'm able to, I'm going to go out there with my family. I can't wait to return. I've been to Sydney. I've been to Melbourne. I have nothing but positive things to say about Australia. And I have to say, I may have been one of the first people to bring No Worries back to America.
No worries. That's awesome. Well, there's plenty of people that will help you, and I can connect you with some people here in Australia to find out where the great places to take your family. So that's awesome.
It's been really fun, guys.
Yeah, we will start. We'll wrap up. We'll be a couple more minutes. We're just going to quickly do someone. We'll recommend someone to go follow on Instagram. So, Adam, why don't we start with you? Then we'll go to myself, and then Ariel, and then we will finish up. Go for it.
Why don't you go first?
Okay, I'm going first. We have on mine is DWW Right. So 55. So DWWRIGHT 55. Got an amazing collection, and he puts some funny stuff up sometimes. Really loves his coffee and watches, but a beautiful collection of quite very different watches. There's Grand Seiko, there's Lane, there's Habring, there's Longines, Cartier, Omega. So he's a very he contributes a lot to people's posts and comments, and so yeah. I've had a few conversations with David Wright over the years. I think I've been following him from, but very cool guy, and worth following on Instagram. So that is mine for today.
And I'll recommend Bridge & Cannon. He is an American collector that really likes to highlight the craftsmanship behind watches, the watchmaking process, and quite an interesting set of posts.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, he's a good one. I've been following him for a while. So Bridge & Cannon. And Ariel, please, someone or something that you recommend our people to go and look at when they finish listening to this podcast.
Look, I'm like a public figure. It's so difficult for me to recommend one person, because all that's going to happen is that everyone I didn't mention will be upset. You didn't mention me. I don't spend as much time as maybe others do on places like Instagram, often because I have so much, I'm writing my own content of doing stuff. Like I get enough watch satisfaction throughout the day in other ways. And, it's so distracting to me. I wouldn't get other stuff done. So I love, seeing some of the people's collections. I think the best thing, for Instagram is to see what people like. I think there's a lot of things to learn about, what other people like. But for me, I think the best thing to do is recommend what to look at when you're not looking at watches. And so I spend a lot of my day reading The Economist. I find The Economist to be probably one of the best, sources of important international news. And I'll just sort of tie it back to what we're talking about, is bias. The Economist is often editorialized, and they're very open with their opinion is. I mean, they make recommendations for who to vote for in key elections and things like that. And I've always appreciated, people say, oh, the media is biased these days. Well, they're openly biased, and they support critical thinking, and they explain their reasoning. And so if you are wanting to be like a watch writer out there and want some good inspiration, read some articles from The Economist. I think that'd be a great educational opportunity.
I agree. I get it in paper form. I'm a subscriber.
Okay, so you see the value too.
Yeah, and actually a couple of weeks ago we announced that our US listenership has now overtaken our Australian listenership. So we've got more people in the US than we do in Australia now, which is awesome. So thank you to all those guys in the States. All right, we will wrap up there. Ariel, thank you so much. It was a true honor to speak to you today. I've been a fan for a long time, and I've read a lot of the articles. Thank you for what you do, the contribution to the community and to the watch world at large. But thank you for coming on. I really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. This was a great chat. Anytime, I'll come back.
Fantastic. Well, for everyone else, as we've always said, please head over to the Fifth Wrist website, fifthwrist.com, and review one of your watches if you want to. It is a lot of fun, and you get to sort of be a watch journalist for a day or two, and have some fun reviewing your watch. So please do that. Adam, thank you very much. Ariel, thank you again. And for everyone else, stay on time.